Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. I'm your host, Amer Zahr. Thank you for joining us on Muslim Network TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and soon Apple TV. Muslim Network TV is America's only Muslim-focused network. You can always watch us 24/7. So recently, several high-profile Palestinian-American activists and organizers had a virtual walkout of a meeting with an advisor to the Democratic Party presidential nominee, Joe Biden, in early June over the campaign's approach to Palestine. The walkout took place on June 3rd, and it took place minutes into the meeting. It was following a heated exchange between Amer Zahr, a well-known Palestinian activist, and Farooq Mitha, who is Biden's Muslim outreach manager, in which Zahr accused the campaign of not taking the Palestinian issue seriously. The exchange was on Zoom, which was recorded, showed Zahr condemning the Biden campaign's decision to send its Muslim outreach manager to engage Palestinian activists on a foreign policy issue like Palestine. And this is reported in the Middle East Eye. So joining us today is Amer Zahr, who was in that meeting and was part of that exchange. And we wanted to hear from him on his views on why the walkout happened and why is he so upset that he was engaged by the Muslim, outreach person on the Joe Biden's campaign instead of the foreign policy lead on this. So welcoming us today, and welcome Amer Zahr. Amer is an Arab-American comedian. He's a speaker, writer, academic, and he's the adjunct professor at the University of Detroit's Mercy School of Law. He draws on his experiences growing up as a child of Palestinian immigrant parents, performing and lecturing on topics like politics, society, Islam, growing up Arab, and more. Amer holds an MA in Middle East Studies and a law degree, both from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He writes and speaks widely on political and social affairs and has appeared on radio and television. And so we're really excited to have him with us today. Thank you so much, Amer.
It's my pleasure. How are you, Hannah?
Alhamdulillah, I am doing well. So I read about this exchange. I hadn't heard of it before until it came out in the Middle East Eye, and then several activists in the DMV area shared their take on it, and it was a very surprising, you could see the comments going back and forth, and you could tell the establishment Democrats, and then there were progressives, and it was a very, exciting comment thread to read. But a lot of people had conjectures, and we wanted to know what really happened, and we wanted to know from your end, from your mouth. So before we start talking about that incident, please tell us a little bit more about yourself. We understand that you're a lawyer, law professor, and a comedian. But tell us more of the work that you do and that you're passionate about, and how you became involved in Palestinian activism.
Well, sure. I mean, I've been involved in Palestinian activism since I was a kid, frankly. My parents were both activists, and some of my earliest memories are being taken to, meetings and demonstrations. And I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and my parents were very involved in Palestine activism and anti-apartheid activism against the apartheid regime in South Africa, and putting those things together. And so I grew up in that life. And I went to college. I remained an activist on many different college campus organizations on the Palestine issue and other issues. And then, of course, I went to law school. I started doing comedy right after law school. And really, activism or advocacy is what my comedy is about, telling our stories and talking about Palestine, or growing up Arab American, or some of the Muslim experience in America, especially with the media and politics and those kinds of things. So I've always been an activist. I can't really point to a time where, this is where I became an activist. It's something that I've always done and used different tools to do that. And then that always parlays into sort of electoral campaign political activism. And so in 2016, I was a national surrogate for Bernie Sanders' campaign. And in 2020, I was a national surrogate for him again. And, his campaign was the campaign that reached out to Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, talked about the Palestine issue. And that sort of activism has really given me a chance to get into our communities, see how they operate, see what they think, see what motivates them, and understand the frustrations that we have as well. And so that's kind of my road to electoral campaign political activism. And, some of it culminated in that call with the Biden campaign a few weeks ago. I can't hear you for some reason.
So when you heard about the call, what did you think was the objective of the call, and what were you all hoping to achieve?
Well, it's not what I thought was the objective of the call. I was told explicitly in text message and conversation, which I have all on my phone, that this call was a Zoom call set up by the Biden campaign. And the person who I talked with was a direct volunteer of the Biden campaign who was sent out to recruit people for this call. And I was told very clearly, the topic is Palestine. Everyone on the call was Palestinian. The topic was clearly told to us that it was Palestine. Also, I was invited onto the call. Some people are out there lying, saying that I crashed the call, which, by the way, it's not possible to crash a Zoom call. You need to have the link to get into the Zoom call. But I was invited. I was invited into the Zoom call by the Biden campaign. They brought us in there and they told us explicitly that the topic was Palestine. And there were leaders of other Palestinian organizations there as well. I'm also the president of an organization here in Michigan called New Generation for Palestine. It's a Palestinian-American networking and membership organization. And so it was clear for anyone who was on that call, was invited to that call, that the topic was to talk about Palestine. We were told we were going to meet with one of Biden's senior advisors, and I was invited to the call. I didn't crash the call. I've seen some people out there lying, saying I crashed the call, which, I've crashed things in the past. Don't get me wrong. I'm a protester. I've crashed a few things in my life, but not this phone call.
And so, what was the, when you went in there and you saw Farooq Mitha there, who is the outreach person for Biden, after there was a big hue and cry over Ajit Sahi being the
I lost it. I lost Hannah.
She'll be back on soon in just a moment.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Should I sing?
Just give it one moment here.
Okay.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I had a technical glitch. So sorry about that. So we're now back on board. So I wanted to know, so once you entered the Zoom meeting, what was your reaction to seeing Farooq Mitha there versus somebody that was from their foreign policy team?
Well, so, this has all happened in a certain context. So about a month before our call, so our call was, I think, on June 2nd or 3rd. I don't remember exactly what day, but about a month before that, in a sort of widely publicized Zoom meeting, the Biden campaign sent their top foreign policy advisor, his name is Tony Blinken, to meet with a group called Democratic Majority for Israel, which is a group of Democratic Party activists who believe in a pro-Israel policy. And he's the top foreign policy advisor, and he was sent to meet with them. He gave them a whole long presentation. He really told them everything that they wanted to hear. And it was a very high level meeting. They got a certain level of respect from the campaign. And we were told to come to a meeting, a topic of being Palestine, with leaders of different Palestinian organizations. And we got Farooq, who is a good guy and does good work, but has nothing to do with the foreign policy wing of the campaign, nothing to do with the people who draw up the policy on Palestine, the Palestinian issue, way, way lower level than Tony Blinken. And, I saw it as a sign of disrespect. And, frankly, it was that they thought they could bring us in there. And that's what I brought up in the beginning of the meeting. And that's what subsequently got Farooq to kick me out of the meeting. He removed me from the Zoom meeting.
So based on what you know, what is Vice President Joe Biden's foreign policy stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, first of all, there is no Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There's occupation and a theft of land and injustice and apartheid. It's not a conflict. His policy is clear. He published his policy. It's on his website. And his foreign policy position on Palestine is very clear. He is basically seeking to be seen as Zionist or more Zionist than Donald Trump. There is no mention of Palestinian rights. There's no mention of violations of international law. No mentions of, using the aid that we give Israel every year to the tune of $4 billion as leverage to make them sure that they comply with international law or cutting the aid in any way. It's all about licking the boots of the Israeli lobby, which is nothing new to Biden. He's been doing that for decades. And so what is clear that Biden is going to do is that he's going to try to take back the pro-Palestine issue from Donald Trump. And frankly, Palestinians have benefited in some ways from the Trump presidency because Trump has made Palestine a partisan issue. He's woken up a lot of people to the real face of Israel. And Biden is just going to be a much more sort of clever Zionist supporter of Israel, shielding them from any real criticism, which has been the way things have been for a very long time. So we're urging him to change his policy if he wants to be taken seriously on this thing. And so, but his policy is very, very clear. He denounces BDS. He says basically that he would stand up for anti-BDS laws, which are unconstitutional. He just gives us all the same lines and even more aggressively about supporting Israel unconditionally because he doesn't want the Democratic Party to be seen as a party that can be critical of Israel. He wants the Democratic Party to be seen as the party that is just as Zionist, just as supportive of Israel as the Republicans are.
And you guys have seen under Bernie Sanders a different way of looking at Palestine from the Democratic Party. And so after having seen that, is it even more harder to stomach what is coming out from the Democratic Party? And despite that they have a substantial Muslim constituency, and then this is something else that I wanted to, if you could touch on that, is to, this tendency to ignore and undermine the voices who want to raise awareness about Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Look, we have done a lot of work. And listen, Bernie Sanders was not perfect on Palestine, but Bernie Sanders changes the conversation fundamentally at the highest levels on how we look at the Palestinian issue in national politics. That was groundbreaking and enough for us to support him. But Bernie doesn't say everything that we would like him to say on Palestine. We're not looking for perfection. I don't even think what he says is that radical or revolutionary either. Okay? Bernie was a big step forward, but not perfect. Biden is openly hostile to us.
Mm.
And that's something different. Because the status quo of American policy towards Palestinians in Palestine has been hostile for 70 years. It has never been honest or even or brokered or anything like that. So what we see with Biden is that he wants to turn back the clock. And as an activist who's been working in politics and organizations for a long time, I'm not going to throw away all the good work that we've done on Palestine and moving forward and changing the conversation because Biden's not Trump. That's not good enough for me.
And that's very important. Can you expand that? Because that is something that we're seeing a lot of, is sort of like taking for granted all these movements that don't fit into the same sort of narrative that has always been established democratic policies. Because do you want Trump again? And that's so. Can you push on that a little bit?
Well, look, I mean, American empire and imperialism and support of, whether it was South African apartheid state or Israel, has been something that's been at the core of American foreign policy for a very long time, way before Trump. And what we run the risk of doing is sort of using Trump as an excuse to excuse every prior foreign policy position of the United States, the Iraq War, the Iraq sanctions, in Libya, Syria, Palestine, and to say, well, look, let's just get Trump out of there. As long as we get Trump out of there, if we really look at the intellectuals of the past who talked about, things from a moral and humanist perspective, people like Edward Said or James Baldwin or Malcolm X, they would never point at Trump and say, Trump is this existential threat to the way America should be. No, they would point at Trump and say, look, Trump is just a product of American politics and American imperialism like everyone else. Okay. And so we have to change the system. And Trump is not a corruption to the system. He's corrupt, but he's not a corruption to the system. The system is corrupt and has been against us for a long time.
Yeah. And he's just using the system as it was meant to be used, or it has been used in the past. So now what's next? So, and especially like with Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib openly discussing Palestine and expressing their opinions and giving an alternative to what has always been pushed, like the trips that the Congress use and that which tend to go against the status quo. Do you think the pro-Israel trajectory will continue to grow within the Democratic Party, or are you seeing a change? So let's perhaps discuss what Senator Van Hollen has just proposed, the new bill tying annexation to Israeli aid.
Yeah, I think, look, the discourse is obviously changing. It was changing a little bit before the Bernie Sanders movement, but the Bernie Sanders movement showed that a presidential candidate who challenges the ingrained status quo on Israel can be a legitimate candidate. We've also seen a lot of congressional people win who challenged that. In 2018, you had AOC and Rashida and Ilhan. In 2020, you've had a few names come up like Jamal Bowman in New York, who openly criticizes the status quo in Israel, and he won his primary against a long-standing Zionist Democratic congressman, pretty handily won that primary. And so the discourse and the fundamentals are changing. The Democratic Party is moving in the direction that we want it to much more quickly than those who stand at the top of the Democratic Party, like Pelosi, Hoyer, and now Joe Biden. And so we have to challenge that. I don't really care what people do when they get into their ballot box in November. And if you want to check off the Joe Biden box because he's not Trump, whatever. But if you go around now and you play this same game of Trump is burning everything down and we need to bring back this, you are then sacrificing some of the work that we've done, and you are sacrificing our issues. For what? For what? And here's the thing. We are the only one. Palestinians are the only ones who are asked to sacrifice our issue. People tell us, and unfortunately, many people in the Muslim community tell us, hey, put Palestine on the back burner now. Let's get Biden elected and we'll deal with him after. Well, let me tell you something. I've been doing activism and campaigns for a long time. Politicians never listen to you more than when they're running. When they win, they stop listening, okay? And they ingrain their power, especially presidents. And so he's listening now. And so just to say, well, he's not Trump, we all got to vote for him, you're doing a disservice to the Palestinian question. And unfortunately, a lot of Muslim organizations are participating in this.
And you know what you're saying over here, and not to, please excuse me if it sounds like I'm demeaning the Palestinian cause, and that is not my intention at all. But this is something that we're seeing in our advocacy for Burma, for the Rohingya cause, in our advocacy for the Uyghur cause, in advocacy for Indian Muslim cause, is every one of those causes are scared that what you were saying is that the achievements that have been made under this Republican administration are going to be rolled back, because those sanctions that were pulled off of Burma from the military were done under Obama. That wasn't Trump. Didn't do that. Right. And so this it has given us a space to work with this administration that a lot of people who just specifically say no, push for Democrats. Yeah, exactly. So this is I'm just trying to echo what you're saying, is that
let's be honest. Without Trump, there's no Rashida, there's no Ilhan. These things don't happen, right? If Hillary would have beaten Trump in 2016, there would have been a parade. Oh, we defeated evil and all this kind of stuff. And now if Biden defeats Trump, it's going to be the same thing. Everyone's going to say, oh, we've taken back our country. The nightmare is over. We defeated evil. Let's have a parade. What? We Arabs and Muslims around the world have been devalued. Our lives have been devalued by every American administration. In fact, one of the weird things about Trump, as dumb as he is that he doesn't like war. And so many less Arabs and Muslims back in our homelands have died by American military than did under Obama. Obama was droning and bombing Yemenis every single day. And that kind of stuff is happening a lot less. So, I mean, people better be careful if they really want to get into these discussions. I mean, look, Trump's an idiot. Trump is an embarrassment, all this kind of stuff. But if you want to get into like body counts of Arabs and Muslims back in our homelands, if you want to get into the notion of has the Palestinian issue been centered more and have we been able to get more solidarity, all that stuff is better under Trump. So, I mean, if you were to ask me right now, would I rather have a chaotic Zionist like Trump who unveils Israel for what they really are and shows how ridiculous our policy is, or a clever Zionist like Joe Biden who protects them and gives a handout every now and then to Palestinians to make it look like he's being equal and all this kind of stuff? I'll take Trump if I only cared about Palestine.
So now with this annexation on, in the foreground, and still no clear-cut American opposition to this in sight, we understand Palestinian activists are increasingly frustrated that Biden has made no attempt to distinguish himself from Trump. And like we just talked about, right, that he doesn't want to. He wants to, he wants to distinguish himself on the side of Israel, not on the side of human rights or this, at all. So, one of the questions that people have asked is, despite their ideological differences, how do you think the Democratic Party can improve, and in what ways can they take further steps to distinguish themselves from Republicans and go about adopting just and principled foreign policy stance that prioritizes freedom, dignity, and equality for Palestinians?
Well, it's not a mystery. I mean, Bernie Sanders did it. He was very clear that he says, yeah, look, you say very clearly what Bernie said. When you talk, if you're going to talk about the dignity and the rights of the Israeli people, then you have to also talk about the dignity and the rights of the Palestinian people. Palestinians are living under blockade in Gaza, and that can be undone by the Israelis. He talks consistently about how Israel is a response. You know, most Democrats like Biden and almost all Republicans, to them, Israel has no responsibility for the suffering of the Palestinians. Bernie changed that. It's not that hard. The model is out there. And frankly, that's where a lot of Americans are now, and probably where the majority of the Democratic Party is now, especially younger people. And so, but that's not who Biden is. Biden is going around bragging that he's a Zionist, bragging. And so every time, so even when Biden says he's against annexation, he's not against annexation because it's a violation of international law and a violation of Palestinians' right to self-determination. He's against annexation because it makes Israel look bad. And he's interested in the continuity of Israel and their ethnocracy and their apartheid. And he thinks this is just, you know, going too far and it would make them look bad. And so that's how he frames everything. I mean, on his website, when he talks about it, he just simply talks about how the Jewish state and his allegiance to the Jewish state and all these kinds of things. Can you imagine if there was a state out there called the Muslim state, or even a state out there called the Christian state, or the black state, or the white state, and an American president swearing allegiance to that state to protect? I mean, it's ridiculous. And so this is the way he talks about it in AIPAC terms. And so you just have to change the way you frame, right? No one said, look, I know, and everyone knows, that we're not in a position now where any American president or any American political candidate, for that matter, any of them, are going to be down on the streets yelling free, free Palestine and labeling Israel an apartheid state every day. That's not where they're at. But they do need to at least change the conversation to say, if we're going to talk about Israelis, we got to talk about Palestinians' rights too. Bernie did that. And Bernie got the support of like 80% of Arab Americans when he did that, because Palestine is still a core issue that we vote on. And so the formula is there. It's not that hard to find and to change. But Biden has showed no interest. Instead, he parades his historical, unconditional love for the state of Israel and for Zionism. And that is going to turn off a lot of Arab American and Muslim American voters. And guess what? We have big numbers in swing states where there could be close elections, like Michigan and Florida and Arizona and Pennsylvania.
True. So now what about his choice for vice presidents? Any of them that you see would be a better choice when it comes to Palestine than others?
Well, for the names that get thrown out there, the only one is that might be a little reason for a little optimism is Elizabeth Warren. But Kamala Harris is a huge, huge Zionist. I mean, huge. And I'm not familiar with the other ones. But Elizabeth Warren might be a step in the right direction. But listen, no vice president has ever crafted foreign policy. Foreign policy is crafted by the president. And in fact, foreign policy is the one thing constitutionally that the president can do and craft and implement without Congress. You don't need Congress to implement. You don't need Congress to move the embassy. You don't need Congress to decide who you invite to the White House and who you denounce in foreign policy. The president is the head of state, and the president sets foreign policy. And so in terms of where the president is more influential, he or she is much more influential in foreign policy than they are in domestic policy. And so that's why having a president who talks in the right terms, or a candidate talks in the right terms, is very, very, very important.
Now, if I'm looking at the change just in being able to walk into staffers' offices and being able to discuss Palestine and there is definitely a change. So what do you suggest that people who are seeing this right now, what can Muslims who might be watching this, or human rights activists who might be watching this, or people who are just concerned about, genocidal policies that states have overseas, what can they do for Palestine right now while election campaigning is going on, while people Congress people, or what can they do?
Well, it's quite simple. Look, there's two. First of all, I'm never one who says just check out and don't be involved in politics because you can't make a change. I don't believe that. I believe that we can. And these changes you see are because activists have stepped in and made a change. But there's two kinds of politics. There's accessibility politics, where you say, basically, I'll say whatever I have to say to get in the room, and I want to have access to these politicians, and that's more important than anything else. And when you do that, eventually you're going to end up compromising your principles. Mm-hmm. Or there is oppositional politics, right? Always being critical, always saying to them, you have to do better. You have to do better when it comes to our core issues. And I believe, obviously, in the latter. No politician deserves your vote just because they're not somebody else, right? It's okay to be very strong on your issues and say, look, you want our community, you want my vote, you need to say A, B, and C. Remember, politicians work for us. I know it's a cliche, but politicians, even the president, works for us. And it's okay to challenge those people. But there's way too many people in our community who determine their own worth by what a politician thinks of them, instead of making the politician determine their worth by why we think of them, right? The people don't try to take a picture with a politician. Be an activist and do enough stuff so that politician wants to take a picture with you. That's how you make change.
Definitely. And right now, like, for example, this bill for tying the aid to annexation, it's a tool. The bill that's out there for Palestinian children's rights, that's a tool. Those tools were not available to our communities before, because a bill like that would never even be introduced. But in these past 4 years, because of the change, bills like this are being introduced. And if we don't make a effort to use those tools for the work, for our issues, then it's a lost cause. Like, all that work that was put in to bring these, and this is something, because a lot of folks don't understand this, the way the American government is set up, it's made for lobbying. It's made to be engaged in. And if you do not engage in that, then that's your loss. That's like, just get on the phone, talk about it. That staffer on the other line doesn't care who you are, where you were born, whether you have an accent or not, or whatever. Right. Like, those are some of the things, that hesitations that people have, that, oh, can I do this? Like, am I able to do this? And so to get people to get activated. So that's one thing that going to town halls, making sure these issues are brought over, and or not just putting all the load on Palestinian activists. Like, if you're passionate about this as well, because you believe that's the right, that is the right cause, then you need to get involved too.
Yeah, so, and don't be afraid to be oppositional. Again, don't be afraid. Politicians are much more likely to respond to people who tell them no than to people who tell them yes. Being in proximity to a politician doesn't mean that you've created any sort of change. True.
Now, one question that we, this is going back to where we started with, when according to, for example, the report in the Middle East Eye, Palestinian activists have repeatedly argued that Zionists have attempted to frame the Palestinian-Israeli, the occupation of Palestine by Israel as a religious issue, a tactic that erases Palestinian Christians as stakeholders, and and that whole misconception of interfaith dialogue, rather than Palestinians' aspirations, their own aspirations. So how should this conversation be reframed reframed, number one, and number two, reframed in such a way that brings about substantial and productive outcomes?
Well, first of all, you have to frame it in the way that we Palestinians frame it. And we don't talk about it in terms, the victims here, the oppressed people, don't talk about it in terms of religion. We talk about it in terms of human rights, civil rights, political rights, an injustice, land theft, and those kind. By the way, it's the same thing with Native Americans and white settlers when they came to this country, right? Native Americans never talked about their oppression in terms of religion, but white settlers talked about their taking of land in terms of religion. Manifest destiny, God wants us to do this. It's the same thing. And so when you fall into the trap of talking about this in terms of religion, many things happen. First of all, like you said, you erase a whole segment of Palestinians who are Christian or secular or whatever they might be. Okay, that's number one. Number two, you make a lot of onlookers check out. So when an onlooker is looking at the situation and says, "Oh, those people are fighting about religion. I don't want to get involved in that. I don't want to get into that. That's a never-ending blah blah blah." It also then makes the issue seem like it's lasted a lot longer than it has, right? This is a colonial issue that is about 70 to 100 years old, depending on when you start. But if you talk about it in a Jewish Muslim way, then you start going back 1,000 years and you said, when the Jews, who cares? None of that matters. All that matters is they stole our land in 1948, they kicked us out, and they don't let us to come back. That's it. And this is, it's a distraction created by Zionists to talk about that. Zionists who, by the way, for the most part, aren't even religious. This is a distraction created by Zionists to sort of stop us from talking about the real issues. And we have to be careful not to fall into that trap. Unfortunately, too many Muslim American organizations fall into that trap and then start doing like normalization products and projects and interfaith dialogue. And maybe if I talk to the ADL, that'll be a good thing. Or let me go on this trip to Israel funded by this Zionist group. And it never, ever works. Listen to Palestinians. We know the tricks. We know the way Zionism operates and what it tries to do to distract. So just don't participate in any of those things. Whenever it gets framed in terms of religion, you have to reject that immediately. And you have to say, this is South Africa.
So I want to have a question for that. So for myself, like I'm just going to talk on a very personal level. The issue of Aqsa is a faith-based issue for me. Like that is a holy place. So how do I, and when we're talking about human rights and, when we're talking about Palestine, obviously we follow the Palestinians and how they want to frame it. But how, on a personal level, when it is a religious issue for me to have, the sanctity of the Holy Mosque is the sanctity of the Holy Mosque. So how would you address somebody like me who perhaps, where does that fall into this?
No. Look, everyone has a religious affinity to Palestine. Mm-hmm. And yes, there's religious significance to the land. But if the Israelis were not Jewish occupiers, but they were, African occupiers of there, you would feel the same way. It wouldn't be a Jewish Muslim thing. If the occupiers of Israel, if the occupiers weren't Israel, but they were, Muslims who were just despotic and very terrible people, you would also feel the same way, that you don't have access. So it's not, we have to be careful not to frame this in Jewish Muslim terms. At the end of the day, the occupation came about because of a colonial idea that is rooted in white European supremacy, which degrades the natives, and all the things that have happened around the world many, many times. Mm-hmm. Yes, there is religious significance to Palestine, but the core of our grievance as Palestinians is not religious. Mm. The core of our grievance is that they kicked us out of our land and don't let us come back and turn us into refugees wandering around the world. Mm. It has had religious ramifications for people who want to access mosques and want to access churches. But the core of what happened to us is not a religious conflict, right? They kicked us out because we weren't white Jews. They didn't kick us out because we were Muslims or Christians. And they even try to play this game a lot, that we treated the Christians better. That's not true. My dad is Christian. My mom is Muslim. They're both Palestinian refugees. My dad is Christian. He was kicked out of his house when he was 1 month old, and they had to ride a caravan to Jordan. So, I mean, again, we have to be careful not to frame. Yes, there is religious significance to Palestine, but I would hope that as a Muslim, you wouldn't care about the Palestinian issue less if the Aqsa was somewhere else.
Exactly. So in the same,
you don't care about, you don't care about the Rohingya issue less because there aren't any Muslim holy sites in Burma.
Exactly.
You don't care about the Uyghur issue less because there aren't religious sites in Western China. Like, this is an issue. There's no reason we can't frame it the same way we frame Rohingya and Uyghur issues, which is it's an issue of apartheid, racism, civil rights, political rights.
Okay, so we have a question. Like you said earlier, it's almost impossible to have politicians listen to you once the elections are done with. Keeping that in mind, when November comes around and Biden being the same Zionist that he was, what would you like to see the American Muslims doing on the ballot, especially considering the foreign policy track records of the Democrats?
I'm going to, Imran, thanks for your question. I'm going to hold off on suggesting who anyone votes for until like maybe 3 or 4 days before the election.
Okay, so we'll have you back on.
Yeah, I'll come back. You can bring me on like the Sunday before the election.
Okay.
At least I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. But my focus now is two things. Don't go around telling people in your community you have to vote for Biden because he's not Trump, because then you take away our agency and our ability to fight for the issues we need to fight for now while he's actually listening. Mm-hmm. Right? So what I say to Imran is, let's have a July discussion now, which is let's be loud and fight for the things we need to fight for. And then let's have a November discussion in November when it's time to actually, check off a name on a ballot. But that's not going to happen for a few more months. We still have time, 4 months, to push this candidate in a direction and let him know that our votes are not cheap. Our votes are not to be taken for granted, that he needs to listen to us on our issues and change certain policies. Because if he doesn't, then it doesn't matter what I say or what anybody else says. There's going to be a lot of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans who are disillusioned and might vote for everything except president or vote for third party, a lot of them like they did in 2016. And in a close election, that's going to matter. So we have to be oppositional and strong now. And let's talk about who we're going to vote for later on down the line. But I think anyone who says now, even if they say it in a way like, Joe Biden's not great, but I'm going to vote for him because he's not Trump. Mm-hmm. Anyone who says that out loud now, you just took away all your bargaining power when you say that, right? We can't be talking like that right now. Mm-hmm. We have to be talking in a way very loudly that these politicians don't have our votes simply because they're not somebody else. They have to do well on our issues.
Yeah. So that it's not you don't take yourself for granted. Otherwise, they're going to take you for granted.
Our votes are not cheap. If you act like your votes are cheap, then politicians are going to treat them like they're cheap.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we see with the pictures at the mosques and coming to Friday prayers and having photo ops, and then you never see them again. Or they'll say, we were waiting for you to follow up. But you're not following up. So that is something that, we have, and there are plenty for people to get involved with. I'm sure each one of your states and local counties even have, Palestine is a cause that is well-grounded. That's right. Something that really, like, there are enough Palestinian activists out there in your local communities who will be more than happy to have you, their policy memos written on this. There's a lot of work that has already been done. Join your local AMP. There are many Palestinian organizations who have already done this work. So that's what I always suggest to people is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Join them, grab the work that they've already done, and walk in, and demand a meeting with your local, whoever.
Yeah, look, AMP is an amazing group, and AMP is called American Muslims for Palestine. But even they don't go around framing the Palestine issue as a Muslim issue. They go around framing the Palestine issue as an issue of apartheid and civil rights and political rights and occupation. So it's important to listen to Palestinians and the way we talk about this.
Exactly. So we were about to wrap up.
Okay.
So is this, as we're moving forward, we'd love to have you back again before. What's going to be next for you from Are you expecting another meeting with the Biden campaign on Palestinian issues?
I don't expect to be invited to it, but you look. From what I understand, I got kicked out of that meeting very quickly. But from what I understand, other Palestinians, the way the Middle East Eye reported, also ended up leaving that meeting, walking out of that meeting, letting the campaign know through Farooq that we were not happy with the treatment that we were getting. And so this is not just me. This is a sentiment in the Palestinian community. And look, there's going to be a time when they're on a stage somewhere, Biden and Trump, and they get asked about foreign policy as it relates to Israel and the Palestine question. And that is going to be the only thing that a lot of Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans and Muslim Americans look at, how they answer that question. And what I think is going to happen now is Trump is going to talk about how much he loves Israel and how much he's done for them. And so is Biden. And he's not going to be oppositional or critical at all, right? Look at what he said. He said, I wouldn't have moved the embassy to Jerusalem, but now that it's there, it's going to stay there. He has said he's against annexation, but he hasn't said, more importantly, that if he becomes president, will he reverse recognition of that annexation, which Trump would give the Israelis recognition of that annexation. He hasn't said settlements are illegal. He hasn't said that Palestinians deserve an immediate end to the occupation unconditionally, that the blockade on Gaza should be lifted immediately. He is, and we thought Obama was okay. Obama turns out that he was bad on Palestine too. Biden is way to the right of Obama on Palestine. So this issue is going to come up on a stage, just like it does every time. And how it is answered is really going to be important as to how people conduct themselves. So, will I get invited to more meetings with the Biden? I don't think I'll get invited, but I'm going to keep staying loud to make sure that people understand that we have to be oppositional. And a group of Palestinians, and hopefully you can share this with your viewers, a group of Palestinian-American academics and activists and political people have put out a statement about a week and a half ago at Palestinian-Principles.com. It's the Palestinian-American Statement of Principles and Policies for the 2020 election, Palestinian-Principles.com. And we lay out very clearly with a list of over 120 influential signatories of where we stand on these issues and the policies that we expect from candidates. And those are the things that we're going to keep pushing through the rest of this campaign.
Okay, so Palestinian could you say that once more?
Sure. Palestinian Principles, not like a school principal, like a Palestinian-Principles.com.
Okay, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for being here and breaking all those. We wanted to hear it from you because a lot of stuff that was being said online, and you cleared up the air, and you said what you needed to say, and I'm really glad about this. And
Hannah, believe it or not, political campaigns sometimes lie. Democratic Party sometimes lies. They sometimes mischaracterize things for their benefit.
That's true.
Just want to put that out there.
It wasn't a pre-planned, I'm going to come in here, wham, bam.
Yeah, I mean, there's such BS. I don't want to offend anybody. That's such BS.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your views with him.
And thank you for doing what you do. I'm very proud of you, and thank you for doing all this as well.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so to our viewers, thank you for joining us. You can always watch us on Muslim Network TV 24/7, on Apple TV soon, Roku. We're on Roku TV and Amazon Fire TV. So thank you. This is Justice for All Now, and I'm your host, Amer Zahr. Assalamu alaikum.